Greetings, everybody out there in Facebook land. This is Ray. I am working on a video project today. Because I'm coronavirus bored. I've got plenty to do, but I don't have anybody to share it with. So I thought, well, I'll make a video and put something online about it. What I'm working on is a 1960-61 Fender Pro, brown-faced Pro amplifier. I'm doing some restoration work inside of it. If you're interested in that kind of thing, come along with me for the ride. It's not a very long one, and it'll be fun. Oh, and by the way, for coronavirus, I know a lot of guys are out there growing beards, coronavirus beards, but I've decided to grow coronavirus hair. So I'm kind of going for like that early Beatles look, like, Beatles 65 or something. I kind of think I'm getting close to that at this point. I'm shooting for like the yesterday and today look, but if I go so far as the White Album, I'm going to go back, So some of you know what I'm talking about with that. So we'll see you soon. And here it is. This is the project I was talking about. It's a Pro amp, a brown face Pro, Fender Pro amp, and it's from about 1961. And judging by the circuit in it, it is a 6G5A, or a transition circuit between the 6G5 and 6G5A, for those of you geeky ones like myself. This is the chassis that's on the bench, being some repairs and changes being made to it. And this is the cabinet over here with a 15-inch Jensen inside of it. Very, very cool amp. I love the sound of the thing. But I had a problem with one of the tubes, as it turned out. I didn't know what it was until I got it apart, but replaced one of the tubes in the circuit, and a loud hum that it had disappeared. I tested the tubes individually, but while I'm in it, I decided I would take a look at the circuit itself and blueprint the circuit against the schematics over here that I have for this particular one, and the layout for the schematics. And so there are changes to it inside that I thought were kind of interesting, and maybe I would point out. One of the things when you're repairing old amps is, usually at this point in time, since they're 60 years old, 50 years old, sometimes 70 years old, somebody's been in there since or before you got there to do some repairs somewhere along the line. And this one has evidence. Some guy did some work on it here, and very, very good work, and he wrote on the chassis to kind of indicate what was going on. One of the things he marked is that he thought it was a 6G5, but it had characteristics of the Showman circuit, the 6G14. I don't really see that, but he did do some unusual things to it that are kind of cool, and there are some things he noticed. Now, what he replaced in this, and what everybody should replace in older amp like this, are these electrolytic capacitors. They wear out. They're a little bit like spark plugs. They dry out over the years. They go off of their specifications, and they leak current, and they make for a bad sound. These are the coupling capacitors to this first tube, which is the normal channel. This first tube drives the normal channel. He replaced both of these. He also replaced the cathode tubes on these. And this, he did something different. He replaced it with a value that's not in the circuit. It's a bigger value than in the circuit. The circuit calls for a 25 microfarad capacitor. He put in a 0.471, 47 microfarad capacitor. Bigger one, and he also changed the resistor that's next to it. Cathode portions of a tube have both a resistor and a capacitor going to ground through this wire here, which you probably can't see. And that pairing has a lot to do with the tone of that cycle. With the 4.7, we should get more bass. I think that's probably why he did it. That does show up in the Showman circuit, but it's not a part of the Pro amp circuits, but he put it in there. Now, reality is that it doesn't change very much. There's a really great spreadsheet online available from an outfit, ampwares.com, that lets you plug in different values for both the resistor and the capacitor and for the plate resistor and capacitor, and we'll graph for you what the frequency response from that kind of a tube, the 12AX7, would be. And when you put the change in, this should have been a 25 with a 1500 resistor, 25 microfarad with a 1500 ohm resistor. He put in a 47 ohm and a 2200K resistor. The difference is pretty much insignificant. He was probably going for more bass, but it really doesn't do it. You would have to go to a much larger thing than those if you were trying to really get more bass out of it. And it just really wouldn't work very well. So I'm going to leave it the way he changed it because there's nothing wrong with them. These caps are probably 10 years old. They're in good shape. No need to replace them. But then as I go along, I see these caps here. These are the original caps, and there's a bunch of them left in the amp still. This one here, 0.01 microfarad, 0.01. These several here. These are the cathode bypass caps on the second tube. And they might be at the end of their lifespan. These are the tubes that are associated with the really complex vibrato that is in this amplifier. This amplifier has the coolest vibrato that Fender, I think, ever made. And maybe with the exception of the Magnavox, it's probably the best vibrato that any circuit in a tube amplifier of this era or now. So these are leaky and they're off value, and I probably will replace them gradually over the next week, one at a time, and to see what the impact is. As I go along the rest of it, this is a newer capacitor, as it should be, and it's the correct value. I did find one thing that was really mysterious, got solved when I got inside this. When I bought the amp 15 years ago at auction, I noticed immediately that the vibrato channel and the normal channel both had vibrato, which isn't the way it was designed to be. The normal channel never has vibrato on it. The vibrato channel has it all. But this one had it on both sides. And I didn't go, because the amp was working fine, I didn't go into it at first to try and determine why was that. But clearly somebody had made a change that made it so that vibrato appeared on both channels. Kind of like if you had a reverb one, and reverb was on both the normal and the reverb channel. Wouldn't make sense, except that somebody had to alter it. I finally found where that happened is I traced the circuit in comparison to the chassis layout and also the schematic. I found that this little wire here, this little wire comes from the vibrato channel, or from the normal channel rather, and it should have gone to this resistor right here. And you can see that it's long enough to reach that resistor right there. Had it done that currently, as it did when it was first made, it would feed the phase inverter and then the power tubes and then the speaker right here. But as it is, it got moved over here, and what it does is it connects to the vibrato channel at the same place as the second channel, the vibrato channel, is connecting to it with the same value resistor, though you can't see it in this view, but it's right there. The two of them are connected to it, and that's why it gets it. So mystery solved, and no harm in it. Certainly no reason to put it back the other way. I like the normal channel. I like the vibrato channel. They do have different tones, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. So I'm leaving it that way. Over here, this is the diode setup that replaces a rectifier. This would have had a tube rectifier in an earlier version, but in this version of it, Fender had switched over to diodes, and they just plugged the hole that was in the chassis, and they installed diodes over here. And this is also part of the negative bias supply, that fixed bias supply for the two 6L6 tubes that are on here. The 6L6 tubes in a G6, in a 6G5 layout are correct. In a 6G5A, these are supposed to be 5881s. A very similar tube, but a little higher grade tube, a little higher specifications on that tube, can take a little more voltage, put out a little more wattage. So this circuit is actually a transition circuit between the two. This didn't get to the 5881s, but all the rest of this is like the 6.5A. It has an extra tube for this incredible tremolo, which I'll demonstrate in a little bit here. Right now, this tremolo circuit, this complex tremolo circuit that has 3 full tubes driving it, an expensive thing to make, isn't working at its top performance, but it works really well. It takes, you have to get it up to about 6 or 7 before it kicks in. Once it kicks in, it is killer. But if I replace these capacitors, it should come right back down to starting at 1 and give me more range of control over it. If you really want more range of control over the vibrato, that's arguable. So anyway, those are the kinds of things that go on in this particular one. The cabinet was in excellent condition. The 15-inch Jensen has been reconed at some point in time. As many of them, as some of you know, the cones on Jensens were glued with fish glue, the paper to it. And after 60, 70 years, that fish glue lets go, and the cone is done. And you have to recone the amp. The speaker rather. There's really no way around it. Those are things that I think are inevitable in amps. To take these amps forward to the next century, you're going to find that the speakers have been reconed. Often, you're going to find that the power transformer and the output transformer have had to be replaced or rewound at some time too. A lot of them, early ones, not so much in this age, 60, 61, but some of the earlier amps that I have, they were potted with beeswax, literally beeswax, and they put them in a pot of melted beeswax and put a vacuum on it so that the wax would get pulled deep down inside the coils of the transformer so that the transformer couldn't rust. And that works fine, but as beeswax gets hot over time, it leaks out. And eventually moisture gets in and really does the job inside of them. So I've had some that have shorted out as a consequence. Some of them are still operating at this late date in the game, 2020. They're still running, and it's running fine. I wouldn't switch it unless it goes. But when it goes, you know, there are transformer shops who can make or rewind, make one to the specifications of the amp that we're talking about, or even actually rewind the existing ones with new copper wire. Expensive. This is the most expensive repairs in an amp, would be replacing this one or what's on the bottom side, the output transformer to the speaker. The power transformer probably doesn't make much difference in the sound. If it's coming in with the same voltage and you're getting the same voltage on all your plates and all your tubes, it's probably not going to make much of a difference. A lot of people feel that there is a significant difference in the output transformer if you have to replace them, and it does change the value of the amp itself in the used market. But anyway, this is a fun amp. I'm going to button it up here in another week or so, probably after I replace these, and I'll come back and play through it a little bit so you have an idea of what a Pro amp from 1961 sounds like. One of the best sounding Fenders in my book. A lot of music that I fell in love with in the early 60s was done through these brown face amps, whether it was a Showman, a Deluxe, or whatever. And hey, Chris Stapleton, he uses a brown Princeton amp, brown face Princeton amp from the early 60s. And now Fender makes a reproduction of that amp because his success rate with that was so good. So I don't know whether I did a decent job with this or not, but hey, it was 12 minutes. I hope they had fun. I'm having a lot of fun with this one, and we can talk more about it at some other time. Leave me a comment. Bah. Okay, so here's the promised video that I said I'd do of the sound of the amp itself after I'd done all the rest of that stuff. I haven't completely replaced all the caps inside of it yet. That's going to come. I don't think it's going to have a lot of impact on the actual sound of the amp. I think the amp sounds pretty terrific just the way it is. And I'll be experimenting with changing caps. But anyway, this is the end of this project for video. Maybe I've got a Vox AC30, an Ampeg B15, and a Fender Twin that are all going to come up too. And then a very interesting old Lafayette bass amp that I've never heard before. 15-inch bass amp. And I have no idea what's inside that one. Maybe rats, maybe mice, God knows. We'll see. But anyway, here's the amp. I'm in the normal channel. I'm going to test it out with a 61 Strat, you know, old timer, and just play a few things. Let's turn on the vibrato, because I think that's one of the coolest things about it. settings, the different settings that the Strat has. Of course, the 5-position switch on it, but here's that cool tremolo. Leo was trying to make it sound a little bit like a Leslie, I think. You know, he split the signal into 2 pieces, a bass portion and then a treble portion, and he sent them to different oscillators, different tubes to oscillate at different speeds, so that and then they get combined back out of phase. Really kind of a clever idea, and that's where you get that swimmy, soupy stuff. So that's the normal channel. The normal channel's tone stack is very different than the vibrato stack. I don't think that's original. I think that the guy before me turned the normal stack into the similar tone of a Showman. And I'll just play through the vibrato, which has, I believe, the original tone stack in it. I'm not even certain about that at this moment. A little bit different tone, a little bit different volume characteristic. To my ears, it's a little softer, not quite so biting. So there you go, 60 brown face Fender. Love them. Gotta love them.